I'm joined by Dapo Adaramewa, a governance consultant. Welcome to Rubbing Minds.
Thank you for having me.
Wow. Let's start with the police being our friend. Do you believe the police is your friend? Do you go on the road and look forward to friendly encounters, or do you always have a sense of, hey, let them not catch me today, I don't have money for the boys or the girls?
I think for most Nigerians, it's definitely not a pleasant experience to run into the average police officer. Now, what hurts me the most is that I understand that there are genuine people who are committed to serving the public who are police officers, but unfortunately, their good deeds and their sacrifices are overshadowed by these terrible elements in the police force. And it speaks to a structural problem, because each time there's an incident, we sit down, we discuss it, we analyze it, and then we move on and wait for the next one, praying that the next one is not as bad as the last one, right? Earlier, I believe this year, a young man was killed, assassinated in the street by a police officer. Then we had, the head of the ICPC himself was extorted by a police officer. And now, obviously, we have another incident where they are making ethnic comments, right? So we have these incidents, but nobody is looking at the structural problems that are causing it. How are we recruiting the people that we're calling our police officers? How are we ensuring that they get the adequate training? You see, what's interesting is that in order to become a doctor and operate on somebody's life and death, you have to go through years and years of training and make sure you're perfectly sane and qualified to hold that position. But yet at the same time, we have people who we just recruit, train them for a few months and put an AK-47 in their hands and call them a police officer. This is a weapon that can take the lives of 20 people in moments, right? So we need to look at how that process happens. How do we evaluate the officers? How do we know that they're properly trained and, let's be honest, perfectly sane? Because some of the behavior of some of the officers we've seen can only be described as insanity.
You raised the issue of recruitment, and it begs the question on the whole structure around the Nigerian police force. Some of them will come out and say, we don't earn enough money. Some will say, we're just the rookies. We get all this money and we still have to give to a boss, or like we say in Nigeria, some oga at the top who is going to collect. So really, these issues expose a much bigger problem. Do you think it's a thing of remuneration, or it's more an overhaul of the whole system, starting from recruitment all the way to also holding them accountable?
I think it is definitely an overhaul of the entire system. We look at it from the beginning to the end. Who are the people we are recruiting into our police force, and how are we treating them? Now, for those of us who have had, the opportunity to visit some of the police barracks around in Nigeria, how the conditions are very heartbreaking for the most part, And these are the people who we're entrusting with the lives of Nigerians. You look at the average salary, I think it's somewhere around 88,000 or something like that. And many of them complain, but from what I've heard from the police officers I know is that they don't get their boots issued to them, they don't have their uniforms issued to them as it should be, and so oftentimes they're having to replace these things out of their own money. And beyond that, one needs to ask ourselves, I believe it was Singapore where they made sure that every serving member of the armed forces has a house in the country. Now you're giving somebody 88,000 naira and you're giving them a gun and you're telling them to go sacrifice their lives for the well-being of the community, when they themselves, based on what they're earning, cannot even own a shack in that society. So what exactly are they dying and fighting for if they can't own a piece of the country that they're fighting for? So there's definitely structural problems that we need to look at. And what creates the environment where our police officers are not being adequately compensated? To me, it is just always down to impunity and corruption. When you have a system that is so corrupt that the higher-ups are able to afford the latest cards, but yet the policeman that is doing the work is in a position where he can't even pay his children's school fees. That is a structural problem, where you have a situation where the people we're recruiting into the police office position are not well trained, they're not well screened to ensure that they're perfectly capable of executing the job. Then we have a problem. And beyond that, where we have a culture of impunity, where people who are reported for excessive use of violence or just corruption are not being dealt with as they should, but simply relocated from one force to another, then we have a problem.
I mean, in this case, we saw that the police officers in question were arrested by their colleagues, and they are saying they will be made to face the full extent of the law. But does this correct the problem? Is this enough as a deterrent to other police officers to not extort people on the road to not make ethnic-based remarks?
I don't think it's an effective deterrent except you fix the structural problems. I think there's definitely a laudable step in terms of bringing in state policing that would help, but I think it would only help in the states that are lucky enough to have leaders that can actually, run those forces effectively. What you then have is a very wide disparity where you would have some states in the state police force which are fantastic and free of corruption, and you'll have some that turn out to be gangsters and worse than criminals themselves. And so until we start looking at the structural problems and ensuring we treat them, even though we are taking the right step of state policing, we would see those things reoccur at the state level as well.
Interesting you mentioned state policing, because right now police officers from the north are serving in the south, from the south are in the east, and you'd expect that level of integration will not allow for ethnic-based remarks. I mean, if you're not serving in a place you're familiar with, surely that should have made you more understanding or more acceptable of someone of a different ethnicity.
Well, you see, I think the problem with Nigeria is that we forget that about a generation ago, this country got its independence in an environment of distrust. And I mean that by the time you read the writings of our founding fathers, you understand that a lot of them along tribal lines deeply distrusted each other, right? So less than a generation ago, we went from that to what we have right now. And there's been no deliberate effort at building a national identity. We don't have any consistent effort. The closest thing we have is NYSC, and that in itself has become a flawed system. Until you teach people, until you build this shared identity that everybody looks at themselves as first and foremost a Nigerian before their tribe, you cannot create that unity. And the government is not prioritizing that. The government is not attempting to do that. Instead, what we are doing is keeping those fault lines alive, so that way we can use it against each other for political gain. You can say, oh, this person is from this side, don't vote for him. This person is from that side. So we're keeping those fault lines alive in our society, and it's naturally going to filter to our police force, to our military, to all sectors of our society until we tackle that problem and try to create a sense of Nigerianness where we have that pride in being a Nigerian first and foremost before we have our pride in our tribal identities.
I mean, the closest we get to being a Nigerian is when we're playing football. Sadly, we didn't qualify for the World Cup, but you get that sense of, oh, I'm proud to be a Nigerian, or when it comes to athletics, or even Nollywood and our music going global. But away from the police to something that affects a lot of Lagosians and even other states that are having to grapple with flooding and a lot of environmental waste. I don't know, what has been your experience? Have you seen refuse being left on the street? Have you had to battle with flooding in the past few weeks?
It has gone to the point where, except the refuse is significantly large, you kind of don't even see it anymore, right? Until you take a step back and remember it's not normal for things to be littering the side of the street. You just assume, oh, this is Lagos, this is just how it is here, And when we talk about flooding, I myself don't live in the regions that have gotten flooded, but I have seen videos of the residents of Lekki and the island, and online people laugh about it a lot. They call it the Venice of Africa and all these other kind of funny things. But beyond that, it speaks to a very serious problem that we're having, and it is because we make decisions without due consideration of the impact. We have a lot of land that is allocated for people to build and sandfill without consideration of the environmental impact. Until it happens, before then people start finding a solution. Lagos is primarily almost an island. It's surrounded by water on almost all sides, and so there needs to be due consideration of how we're giving permits for people to build up structures, how we're blocking the waterways of the state, how the drainage system. I mean, look at Lekki, for example, one of the priciest piece of real estate in all of Africa, not just Nigeria, but yet it flogs on a regular basis. It's predictable. That's how flawed the system is, to the point that you can say, okay, at this time of the year, carry your boats when you're going to Lekki. And it happens, and nobody seems to be taking it seriously. We have governors leave and come back, and nobody seems to have a sense of, it being a serious problem enough for them to tackle it. I think the gentleman in charge of the Minister for the Environment was quite busy recently, just tweeting obscenities as opposed to getting his job done. I
think you're referring to the Commissioner of...
The Commissioner, yes, that's definitely what I'm talking
Tokunbo Wahab. And he has come out to say the reinstatement of environmental sanitation is one of the efforts the government is doing to ensure that Nigerians take responsibility, negotiants of their environment. And again, the argument is that we are the ones who are clogging up the drainage with waste, and that's what's leading to the flooding, while Nigerians are saying, what is government doing to put things in place, knowing that every year it's going to rain and there's the chance of flooding? So who's really to blame?
You see, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you first offer people a solution, and then you punish the people who don't go with the solution you've offered. And what I mean by that is we need to ask ourselves, how effective is the waste management in Lagos in the first place? How regular is it that the trash is picked up and disposed of properly? Is that happening on a regular basis? And for the most part, it's not. So until we tackle that problem, we can't now start punishing the people for their misdeeds, right? I think the government needs to firstly do its own part and ensure that waste management is done effectively throughout every corner of this state. And then by all means, we all would support that, you punish the people who, despite the fact that they have a regular waste disposal system in their neighborhood, are still choosing to throw their trash in the gutter. By all means, punish them for what they're doing. But please, make sure that you have an effective and working system that's an alternative, so that way the only people that are left, are the people who have made a conscious decision, to abuse the system, not just people who feel like, well, I've left my trash there and nobody has taken it for weeks, and it's creating a mess on my street. Maybe the next best thing for me to do is hide it where it won't be seen, which happens to be, a drainage ditch. And so we need to the government needs to do its own part before going after the citizen, and not putting the cart before the wheel, not putting the sense of responsibility of fixing the nation on just the citizens. Or I think recently we had statements of the wife of the president talking about the fact that she believes that our celebrities should be funding the needs of Nigerians, and that's just wrong. We need the government to do its bit before we expect the citizens to then take their own responsibilities.
I mean, a lot is to be seen about the reinstatement of the environmental sanitation, but for the most part, Lagos streets still remain dirty because refuse is not collected on time, drainages are clogged, and flooding seems to just be the norm. So I'm not really sure what exactly is being done, but it will be very helpful to see the government play, as you said, a more proactive role. I mean, in developed climes where they have flooding issues, there's a system in place. So, I'd like us to look at the issue of aviation. I mean, in church today, someone gave a testimony about being in an aircraft and they tried to land and they went back up in the air, and it was just for a few seconds. And I'm sure that didn't make the news. What made the news was the Enugu Air incident at Benin. But that just shows that there's a bigger problem, and sometimes we're not having these conversations. We've seen in the past where a wing of an aircraft is broken and, really deplorable seating, and one begins to question how safe air travel is. Going by all these incidences, do you think the government is doing enough to put confidence in people who want to fly to their destinations?
You see, I remember, quite some time ago, there were two tragic airline incidents that happened very close to each other. That was a wake-up call for the Nigerian government, and it overhauled the way the aviation industry worked. And as a result of that, we saw no more of that. But what has happened recently, it would seem, is that we're having a lot of near misses. And what I fear is that if action is not taken now, we will return the times of shall we say, devastating tragedies, right? So it would be nice for the government to do its own bit and ensure that, our airlines are safe. And for the average Nigerian, these are problems which we can discuss, but the average person is asking themselves, okay, how can I help with this, right? How can I fix this problem? It's out of my control. And my response to them would be that your responsibility is ensuring you have good leadership that will prioritize your interests, not the interests of godfathers. And so it's about people going out there, voting, engaging in the political process, and understanding the power and importance of their votes, because with the right leaders, the right actions will follow.
Somehow we found a way to take the conversation back to, I think, the issue that a lot of Nigerians are thinking: 2027, will my vote count? Will it make a difference? And it all rises and falls on leadership, from aviation to the policing to the environment. And for the Nigerians out there who are saying, well, we've gotten our PVCs, but what's the guarantee that we're going to be safe at the polls? What's the guarantee that my vote will count when, there's all these ethnic divisions happening already online, and even a police officer making those kind of remarks? What message do you have for them?
Earlier somebody, a very brilliant person, was giving me the example of what would your reaction be if somebody tried to snatch your phone? Right, you would definitely do all that you had within your power to protect what belongs to you.
I mean, if they're not holding something that...
Yes, if they're not holding something, but it depends what they're holding. If they're holding just a stick, I'm very sure you would gather some of your people and you would,
Or you just shout, ole, ole.
Oh, you shout, ole. Do you get what I'm saying? So we would make an attempt to fight for what we believe to be valuable. And the Nigerian people need to understand that your vote is the most precious thing that you have. It is the primary means by which you participate in this democracy. And so it's something that you have to fight for, you have to be willing to fight for, and you have to defend, not just for your sake, but for the sake of your children. And because you owe it as a debt to the people who fought for you to come this far. Because this country was not born, so free.
It is a debt that we all owe. I believe the former national anthem is "Arise, O compatriots."
Yes.
The labor of our heroes past. Thank you very much, Dapo Ajara Mewa, for your contributions on Robin Minds.
Thank you for having me.